Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's story is about something Padre Pio heard that we never will, at least not on this side of eternity. He said, "Heaven doesn't stay silent when a soul comes home." He heard the celebration, the joy, the rejoicing, and it wasn't reserved for great saints or massive conversions. It happened for one soul, just one. A single person turning back to God was enough to make all of heaven erupt in joy. Padre Pio witnessed this over and over throughout his life, and he said the reaction was bigger than anything we could imagine. He once told a spiritual son, "If you knew what happens in heaven when one soul returns, you would spend your entire life helping others come back." That's what we're looking at today, the moment heaven rejoiced over one soul's return, and what Padre Pio saw when it happened. Padre Pio once said, "Heaven does not remain silent when a soul returns to God." It wasn't a metaphor to him. It wasn't poetic language. He meant it literally. He explained to his spiritual children that every time a soul turned back to God, heaven responded with celebration, with joy, with a rejoicing that filled the invisible realm. He said he heard it. He witnessed it, not once or twice, but constantly throughout his life. Most people think of heaven as a place of stillness, of peaceful silence. Padre Pio saw something different. He described heaven as alive, active, always watching, always waiting for souls to come home. And when one did, he said the response was immediate and overwhelming. He told his confessor that he heard singing, voices joined in harmony, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He said it was like hearing thousands of bells ringing together, or like the moment when dawn breaks and the whole world seems to wake up at once. What surprised people the most was that this didn't happen only for great conversions. It wasn't reserved for famous sinners who returned to the faith after decades. Padre Pio said, heaven rejoiced just as intensely for the person who had been away from confession for a few months as it did for someone who had been lost for years. He explained it this way: heaven measures by love, not by time. A soul returning is a soul returning. The joy is always complete. But the clearest example of this came one afternoon when Padre Pio was hearing confessions in the small chapel at San Giovanni Rotondo. According to one of the friars who was present that day, Padre Pio had been hearing confessions for hours. He was seated in the confessional, listening to a penitent, when his expression suddenly changed. His face went pale. Tears began streaming down his cheeks. The friar standing nearby noticed immediately, because Padre Pio had gone completely still, as if frozen in the middle of listening. The penitent finished and left, and the friar approached him. "Father, what happened? Are you all right?" Padre Pio looked up, his eyes still wet, and smiled gently. It was the kind of smile, the friar said later, that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. He whispered, "I heard them." The friar asked, "Heard who, Father?" Padre Pio answered, "Heaven, the angels. They were singing." He explained that moments earlier, the person in the confessional had confessed sins they had carried for years. The weight had been crushing them. They had stayed away from God, from the sacraments, from peace, because they believed they were too far gone to be welcomed back. But in that moment, they said yes. They chose to return. And at the exact instant absolution was given, Padre Pio said he heard heaven erupt in celebration. He described it as a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like thousands of voices joining together in perfect harmony. He said it wasn't loud in the way earthly noise is loud, but it filled everything. It surrounded him. He told the friar it was the sound of pure joy, the kind of joy that can only come from love being fulfilled. The friar later wrote that Padre Pio said something he never forgot. Heaven rejoices more over one sinner who returns than over 99 who never left. I heard it today. I heard them welcome this soul home. That experience simple as it seemed on the surface, revealed something Padre Pio believed with his whole heart. Every single soul matters more to God than we can possibly understand. Padre Pio explained it this way: heaven knows the battle every soul fights to return. We see the surface, the simple act of going to confession or saying a prayer. Heaven sees the entire struggle, the years of shame, the fear of rejection, the weight of believing you're too broken to be forgiven. When a soul finally turns around and takes even one step back toward God, heaven sees the courage in that step, and it responds with joy. He said it was like a father watching for a lost child to come home. The father doesn't wait until the child reaches the front door to feel relief. The moment he sees the child on the horizon, heading in his direction, his heart leaps. That's when the celebration begins. Padre Pio insisted that heaven operates the same way. The joy doesn't wait for perfection. It begins the instant the soul chooses to return. He told his spiritual children that even the smallest acts of turning back mattered immensely. Someone who hadn't prayed in months and whispered one Hail Mary. Someone who went to confession after staying away out of fear. Someone who decided, quietly and without telling anyone, that they wanted to try again. Padre Pio said heaven saw these moments and reacted immediately. The rejoicing, he explained, wasn't about the soul's merit or worthiness. It was about love being fulfilled. God wants every soul home, and when one begins the journey back, the longing of divine love finds its answer. Angels and saints join the celebration because they understand what it means. A soul was lost. Now it's found. There was one testimony that showed this more clearly than any: teaching. A woman came to Padre Pio years after she had stopped going to the sacraments. She later wrote about the experience in a letter to a friend. She said she had been carrying shame for so long that she believed God had given up on her. She avoided confession because she thought the priest would judge her, or worse, that even if he didn't, God already had. But something inside her broke one morning. She couldn't explain what it was. She just woke up and felt an overwhelming desire to try again. She went to the chapel where Padre Pio was hearing confessions. She knelt in line, her hands shaking, rehearsing what she would say. When her turn came, she entered the confessional and began to confess. The words poured out, everything she had been holding for years. At the moment, Padre Pio spoke the words of absolution. She said she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace, not relief, not just the absence of guilt. Peace, a warmth that seemed to settle over her like a blanket. She said it felt like being embraced by someone she couldn't see. After confession, she stayed in the chapel to pray. A few minutes later, Padre Pio walked past her on his way out. He stopped, looked at her gently and whispered, "Heaven rejoiced when you said yes." She looked up at him, stunned. He smiled and continued walking. Later, she asked one of the friars what Padre Pio meant. The friar explained that Padre Pio often saw or heard heaven's response to souls returning. He told her that at the exact moment she chose to come back, heaven had celebrated. Padre Pio witnessed it. The woman said that knowledge changed everything for her. It wasn't just that God forgave her. It was that heaven itself had been waiting, watching, hoping she would return. And when she did, they didn't wait to see if she would stumble again. They rejoiced immediately. Padre Pio later taught that the joy begins the moment the soul decides to return, not when the journey is complete. Heaven doesn't measure by results. It celebrates the choice. Padre Pio witnessed this again and again throughout his life. Testimonies record him responding to heaven's joy in the middle of prayer, during Mass, while walking through the monastery. Each time, someone nearby would notice his face change, his eyes fill with tears, or a quiet smile appear. And each time, when asked, he would say the same thing: a soul had returned, and heaven was celebrating. There was a man who had lived away from God for most of his adult life. Anger and bitterness had hardened him. He refused the sacraments, refused prayers, pushed away anyone who tried to bring him back. On his deathbed, his family begged Padre Pio to pray for him. Padre Pio did. He prayed quietly in his cell, asking Our Lady to intervene. Minutes later, the man, who had not spoken a religious word in decades, whispered, "Help me." He asked for a priest. He reconciled. He died in peace. Padre Pio said afterward that he heard heaven's joy the moment the man's heart softened, not when he died, but when he chose to ask for help. Another testimony came from a soldier who had cursed God during the war. He later wrote to Padre Pio, describing a moment on the battlefield when he thought he was going to die. In desperation, he shouted a prayer he hadn't said since childhood. He survived. Years later, he came to Padre Pio and asked if God had heard him. Padre Pio answered, "I heard heaven rejoice for you that day, even though we were miles apart." There was also a woman who had been away from confession for years. She finally returned, trembling with fear that she would be rejected. Padre Pio later described heaven's celebration over her return as louder than any earthly festival. He said the angels didn't measure how long she had been gone. They only saw that she had come back. Padre Pio taught that heaven doesn't operate on human timelines. The soul that returns after 1 month and the soul that returns after 40 years both receive the same welcome. The joy is complete in both cases, because what matters to heaven is not the duration of absence, but the decision to return. He said, "Heaven values the soul, not the calendar." But the most detailed description of heaven's rejoicing came one evening when a friar witnessed something he would never forget. One evening in the choir, a friar entered to prepare for evening prayer. He found Padre Pio standing completely still near the altar. His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at anything in the room. His gaze seemed fixed on something beyond the walls, beyond the visible world. Tears were streaming down his face, but his expression wasn't one of sadness. It was wonder. The friar stood quietly, unsure whether to approach. Several minutes passed. Padre Pio didn't move. Finally, he blinked slowly, as if returning from somewhere far away. He took a deep breath and noticed the friar standing there. The friar approached carefully. "Father, are you all right? What did you see?" Padre Pio wiped his eyes and whispered, "A soul just returned to God. I heard the angels singing." His voice was soft, almost trembling. He looked at the friar and said, "Do you want to know what it sounded like?" The friar nodded. Padre Pio described it as a sound that seemed to fill everything, not loud in the way earthly music is loud, but vast. He said it was like thousands of voices singing in perfect harmony, a melody he had never heard before and couldn't reproduce. The sound didn't come from one direction. It surrounded him. It moved through him. He said it felt like standing inside light that had become sound. He told the friar he also saw the soul being welcomed. He described it as a moment of pure embrace, not physical, but spiritual, where the soul was received with a tenderness beyond anything human love could express. He said he saw light brighter than any sunrise, and within that light, figures he understood to be angels, gathering around the returning soul. Padre Pio said, "This happens every time a soul returns. We just can't hear it. Heaven is never silent when love is fulfilled." The friar later wrote that what struck him most was the contrast. On earth, in that quiet chapel, there was nothing. Silence. Stillness. But in the invisible realm, there was an explosion of joy, a celebration so immense it brought Padre Pio to tears. He taught that heaven and earth exist side by side, separated only by a veil we cannot see through. But sometimes, for reasons only God knows, that veil becomes thin. And in those moments, the truth becomes visible. Heaven is always watching, always waiting, always ready to rejoice. In his final years, when Padre Pio's body had weakened from decades of suffering, a doctor who cared for him noticed something unusual. Even in his exhaustion, even when the pain from his wounds made it difficult to move, Padre Pio would sometimes pause in the middle of a conversation, close his eyes, and smile, or tears would suddenly appear. The doctor asked him once if he was in pain during those moments. Padre Pio shook his head gently. "No," he whispered. "A soul just came home. Heaven is celebrating." The doctor was struck by how consistent this was. It didn't matter how weak Padre Pio felt, or how much he was struggling physically. He remained sensitive to heaven's joy. The doctor later said it was as if Padre Pio lived with one foot in this world and one foot in the next, constantly aware of both. One of the friars asked him how he could keep going, how he could continue his work when his body was failing. Padre Pio answered, "This is what keeps me going, knowing that heaven never tires of welcoming souls back. How can I rest when there is still so much joy waiting to happen?" He believed deeply that the souls who reached heaven, because others helped them return, would become intercessors for those who had prayed for them. He explained it as a kind of mutual exchange. When you help a soul come home, that soul begins praying for you immediately. They remember, they are grateful, and they bring your needs before God without ceasing. A spiritual daughter once asked him, "Father, if someone I prayed for reaches heaven, will they help me?" Padre Pio smiled and said, "They already are. Heaven never forgets who brought them home." He described heaven as a place of constant activity, not stillness. The souls there are alive, more alive than we are, he said. They see clearly, they love perfectly, and they never stop interceding for the ones who helped them. Toward the end of his life, Padre Pio grew quieter, but his awareness of heaven's joy never dimmed. Padre Pio's last teaching on this was simple. He repeated it often in his final months, almost like a gift he wanted to leave behind. He said, "Live so that heaven rejoices when you come home. Help others return so heaven celebrates even before you arrive." There was no complexity in his words, no theological elaboration, just a clear, gentle invitation to participate in the joy of heaven by bringing souls back to God. In his final days, the friars gathered around his bed. His voice was weak, his body worn from years of carrying the wounds of Christ. One of them asked him quietly, "Father, do you hear them now? Do you hear heaven?" Padre Pio's eyes filled with tears. He smiled, just barely, and whispered, "Always. They are waiting for us. They want to celebrate." Those were among the last clear words he spoke about heaven's joy. The friars said that even as his strength faded, he would sometimes smile at moments when no one else understood why. They believed he was still hearing it, still witnessing the invisible celebrations happening all around them. When Padre Pio died, the friars who were present said the room felt different, not heavy with grief, but light, peaceful. One of them later described it as if a door had opened somewhere they couldn't see, and the sound of welcome had poured through for just a moment. The joy he heard his entire life, the joy he believed awaited every soul willing to return, the joy he knew would greet him the moment he arrived home,